Hello, welcome to John and Ann's video blog. I think this is the 4th video we've done, and Ann thinks it's the 5th video we've done. As soon as we're done filming this, we will find out the truth.
Yeah. John was going to wear his glasses this week so that he could make sure he was in frame, but then they reflected light from the video camera, so now he's
so I can't do that at all, I'm just blind. Which is what I've been for every other video.
So today, we have some questions. We're going to talk a lot about combat and ticks and various things that different kinds of players can do in combat. I have some questions here. We got a video cat today.
Let the cat in the video.
So our first question today is, why do some boons require 10 tick actions? Doesn't that seem a bit counterintuitive since the wheel has 8 ticks?
Hello, person. You still use the combat wheel, like it's in the Scion books. For people who don't know, a lot of my players have no idea what this is. Is this showing up on screen?
Here we go. This is the combat tick wheel, as you see it in Scion, and is drawn on a note card by John.
Yes. So what this wheel usually has, for those who don't know the general rules for Scion, is you would put the characters who are moving on tick 0 onto the actual 0 tick, and then whatever tick someone was going on, they would move around the wheel, and then it just kind of circles back around to the top. So what this person is asking is, because the tick wheel by default only has 8 spaces, is it weird to have something with 10 tick actions? And I agree that if you were using this wheel, a 10 tick action is a little difficult to show.
Because you would be technically putting that character on the 2 tick, which would make it look like he was going before everyone instead of much like, so it's confusing.
We don't use this. We do use the tick system, though, with each tick representing a second, and their speed actions, just like it's in the book, end up, them farther down in ticks. But we use this. My player, Tom, created it for me, and before I had this, I just wrote it on notebook paper. And for this, there's just little dots, but they could be numbers, and it starts up here with tick 0, and then instead of spinning around, it just goes up and down the lines. There's something like 87, that's an odd number, 88 on each side.
Which is more than you're going to need for most combats.
And then it's double-sided, you can flip it over, and it's in a little thing. So I just wipe it off with the same wipe I use for a battle map, and then it's ready to go again for the next combat.
And it's exactly the same idea, where your actions take a certain number of ticks, and then you move down the amount of ticks. It's just a different way of looking at it visually, which helps you out because then you're not locked into, well, I have to do everything within 8, or else I'm not going to be able to understand where these people are in relation to each other in time.
Yeah, and when you talk about, well, if something takes a 10 tick action, so that throws it off the wheel, what if one of the characters was running during the combat, and you were like, you will reach the place you're running to in 20 ticks? That's even harder to show on the wheel, as you go spin it around. And people solve this by letting the person move each tick, but that bogs stuff down a lot. What I would do is I just use my thing, and I go, okay, well, you're going to reach your destination in 20 ticks, so your next action at the destination is down here. And that seems to work a lot better, and then it allows us for the 10 tick actions, and it really lets us kind of move the number of ticks an action could take all across the board, whatever we need. I do a lot of stuff that, I have a lot of monsters that have powers that only happen every 30 ticks. So, I go through before the combat and mark every 30th tick if they're going to use that power then, and then at least I know that it's available to use then.
It gives time a lot more fluidity, and the battle wheel is a great idea because it keeps up that idea that everybody's moving in relation to each other at the same time, and that different times are, how long it takes you to do something changes what order you go in. It's a lot better than just a simple everyone takes a turn idea. But we don't want it to get crippled by people not being able to move past the 8th tick, or we don't want it to be crippled by having to every single tick stop and do incidental actions. So.
And I find it a lot easier to handle everything over on my side of the board with the math and the ticks instead of having to worry about it being out there and players kind of jumping around and figuring their way around the wheel. However, if you were to use this and you've been using the tick wheel and you like the tick wheel, but you'd like to involve our 10 tick actions, you can just make a slightly bigger wheel and separate it into 10 equal parts. That would just be another line, just right there. Right there.
You can't see, folks. But
yeah, I can't see, and I don't even think you can see this.
the 8 ticks are actually pretty much arbitrary because they're seconds and it doesn't matter when they're happening. So you can have 10 or 12 or whatever.
So if you think the max you'll ever use, if you want to integrate with our system, is to use a 10 tick action, then you can use the 10 tick wheel, or I guess an 11 tick wheel if you want to really make it work. And then you can just use that and still accommodate everything while using the wheel tick system if you really like that. I would recommend moving away from it, though. I think you'll find that it's easier and works better. But some people are really attached to it and have been doing it for a long time. Okay, we are back to part 2 of week 5's video blog.
I won my argument.
Yes. Okay. So apparently it's our 5th blog. All right, you win. Also, part 2 did not go so well. Anne disagrees, but we had a talk. We're going to do a new part 2. It's going to be better and more fun and have more Coke Zero for me. So here we go.
And the Coke Zero will make him feel better when I disagree with him. So our second question is...
Caffeine releases endorphins in your body.
It does. So our second question is a really long one, and it has a lot of involved moving parts, so I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'll put it up under the video. But basically it boils down to combat can be a huge time sink in your session. How do you balance combat for characters that aren't that combat savvy so that they're not left out and so that they have something to do even when combat's going on?
Boom. Great question. I think a lot of people have, especially at the lower level, have a lot of problems with this. I think there's a bunch of different problems that come up from it. We're going to attempt is Anne's going to give me a problem, and then I'm going to solve it.
Okay. So problem 1, you have characters, which rarely, but we have had them, that have no combat utility at all. They can't do anything
Zero.
in a combat to help save other people or fight the enemy. They can do nothing but stand there.
They may be the blessing of bravery person, or the blessing of importance person.
Yeah.
So they can give willpower back. So they do like nothing for 30 seconds or a minute, which in game time is like 2 hours of a combat, and then they go, "You're awesome! Get your willpower back," and then they're bored.
And that's not exciting for them.
Not exciting.
We've had those characters who are like, well, I have 35 levels of death and psychopomp, but I can't do anything when we're fighting a monster.
Yeah. Or a mage.
Yeah, mages have it rough sometimes. Once they've blown their evil eye, they're kind of done.
Yeah. So, here's how I deal with that. Let's give 2 scenarios. Let's give that charismatic person that only has blessing of importance. What are they doing during the combat? If it's a very short combat, there's probably not a whole lot they can do. But what you can do is you can plan to make your combat not super short. And how you can do that is make it a long succession of combats. So let's say the entire battle takes place over 10 hours, but they only fight something every once an hour. So while they're doing that, the charisma person is in a different place, or it could be in the same place doing some other stuff, but it's better if he's in a different place. Let's say they're in the north, and they're battling off frost giants. And what they need to do is they need to keep this town safe for the next 10 hours from frost giants.
Until reinforcements arrive.
Until the charisma guy fixes shit. So he's not going to be there with them. They're just going to be battling off reinforcements, all the combat characters doing their awesome combat stuff, saving this village. If the charisma guy doesn't succeed, at the end of that 10 hours, the really big frost giant comes. And this is a battle they probably can't win. Maybe the charisma guy loses and... Excuse me, Coke Zero. They are able to pull off the amazing battle. They give them like the tiniest chance, but it should be really fucking impossible. And as an ST, you need to make sure you make it impossible. Don't make it that thing where they trick you, or the players are like, "Oh, but you forgot I can legendary deed." It needs to be fucking hard.
And you can do this in smaller chunks too. Like, it doesn't have to be a 10-hour epic. It could also be, this is a regular combat, but 30 seconds in a new enemy arrives, and that prolongs it. And then 30 seconds after him, a new enemy arrives. And so you could have smaller combats that, are closer to regular combat size, but still give that social character time to do something else.
Right. So what the charisma guy's got to do, let's say, is while they're all fighting, he has to convince Odin to send reinforcements. And so he's got a complicated system of finding a way to get up to Asgard, cajoling someone to get him up there. Maybe he's not a god yet, and he's got to be taken there. Then he's got to get past Heimdall, That should take a while. Then he's got to walk across Asgard. He's probably got to run into a bunch of like elves and dwarves maybe walking around Asgard that he's got to deal with. Maybe plant another situation where Freya comes up and tries to make love to him, but he can't do that right now because he's on a mission.
It's a peril of Asgard.
Yeah. And then finally get to Odin's Hall. You got to get past his guards, and then you got to finally get to Odin, convince him to send reinforcements and help.
One of our favorite things to do is it's hard to open the doors in Asgard because they're big.
Yeah.
So you might have to get somebody to open the doors for you.
Yeah, that's another good one. Yeah, if you're weak.
So yeah, so all of that can take any amount of time.
Yeah. So in our 10-hour scenario,
yes,
he's got, let's say, they do a big battle and then we go do his scene, and he gets a whole scene to himself, doing each of those parts that he's trying to do, and then as soon as you feel like he's got enough screen time, then we can go to another battle. It can fast forward. Time doesn't have to be as constructed as 10 hours. But we can give him some screen time and then zap back to them. And as long as both things are progressing, and it can make sure everybody's involved.
And then everybody is involved in like a very immediate way. Because the combat characters know that they need him to succeed and they're trying to buy time for him to do that. And he knows that him succeeding is important to them not dying. So he's a very important part of the combat even though he's not there, and if he were there he couldn't be doing a lot.
Yep.
So to give you another thing that maybe is a challenge for combats, another idea would be when you have a combat where you have some characters who do have some combat utility. They can kill some things, but there are characters who are much better at combat. So you have a couple of combat monsters, and then you have some people who have some combat utility but can't compete with these other guys.
Yes. So you got the people who have medium combat utility. Let's say the intelligence person also has a gun, and they're decent at shooting the gun. They can kill stuff maybe a little legend below them or 2 legend below them, but they can't fight stuff on their own level. They'll be in trouble. So what you can do is you can give them a lot of lower legend stuff, or like a whole separate combat over here kind of, so that the combat fighters can fight the big monster and the little guys can hold off the little monster. You just got to make sure that the little monster stuff is important. Like, if they don't hold them off, then the combat people will get flooded and overrun and not be able to succeed.
And if it's a case where you're not quite sure what the different power levels are between the big combat guys and the smaller combat guys, you can also tailor those smaller creatures to specifically the other Scions that you know are going to fight them. Like, if you have somebody who's a secondary combat person who's not their first stringer, but he has a lot of fire boons, you might want to overrun the field with a lot of ice creatures, so that even though he couldn't normally fight them off, because he's built to be able to melt ice cubes, he can do more than he would.
Yeah, that's a very good one.
So, things that the combat monsters maybe couldn't beat down too well, he has an advantage against because he has fire.
A great one for that is let's you go look at your combat characters and see what purview they don't have. Let's go with fire. And then you say, okay, well, this ice guy's coming in. He's got double the soak of everyone else. So even the combat people cannot touch him.
They could maybe eventually burn him down, but it's going to take forever. It's going to be
There's
really
a lot
hard.
of legend.
They might die.
Yeah. But fire guy, he can fight this dude. Only fire guy can succeed here. And that gives people their spotlight while still making the combat really important.
Right. And you don't want to do any of these solutions all the time. You want to mix it up every time, because you don't want people to feel like, well, you're just always catering to Jenny. Here comes her monster that fire kills easily. But you do want to make sure that they always have something to be doing.
Yeah. And I wouldn't say always. I would just say most of the time. You definitely can have your combats where it's like, all right, it's combat time. Okay, the combat monsters fight, or the combat characters kill everything. Okay, that was fine.
It's okay for once in a while that to just be the combat people's time, especially if you're doing things in the rest of the game. Like if you're going to have 2 hours of negotiation after that, it's okay for the social characters not to have been doing anything in the combat.
Oh, yeah, that's another really good point. Is if the social or mental characters just had a huge scene, like 3 hours of a political conference with the Amatsukami, and they were all using their politics and eating rice correctly and sipping their tea for 3 hours, then it's okay to be like, all right, well, you get out of there, and this huge monster comes that only the combat people can deal with, and they just get to have a fight and let loose and have fun.
And switching things like that is always good for the players, because those combat players who've either been sitting around not doing anything for 3 hours or have been ruining things for their social friends because they're bad will now get to feel good and do something effective.
And the social people get a break. They've been talking and mentally stressed, and they probably want a little break later too.
And it works the opposite way. When a giant combat's over, then the combat characters can relax for a minute and let the social characters take center stage. Yeah. Or the mental characters, whatever you're doing.
Yeah. So it's all about balance. And working through that. Do you want to talk about the cinematic thing or the bark?
Let's. I'll talk about the bark because it's one of my
Okay.
favorite stories from our games. It's hasn't been written up.
It is my best combat I've ever made.
It was pretty great. So, a game that we ran at one point, we were using our Better Next Time group, which is Sangria, Jeff, Marcus, and Goes. Sophia actually wasn't there because her player was on vacation at the time. So, what we ended up doing is we had two characters who were huge combat characters, which was Marcus and Sangria. And then we had one character who was a huge social beast, Jeff, but who was kind of sketchy on his physicals. And then we had one character, Goes, who was a trickster, who had a lot of really cool mixed bag stuff, but he wasn't really good at any of those other things. And so the major combat that we ran that really worked well to illustrate this idea was we decided that Jeff was going to have to pilot Ra's sunboat. Ra was indisposed. The sunboat had to get where it was going. And so you needed a sun god, which was a special skill that Jeff did have. And you need somebody who could their job is going to be to make sure that boat keeps going. He's rolling charisma rolls. He's rolling control boat rolls. He's being a badass, basically. But there's a giant combat going on at the same time because, of course, Aphep's forces are trying to knock the boat out of the sky. So you have the two combat characters are in a constant hours, the whole length of the night, because they're on the solar bark, are fighting this giant combat against the minions of Aphep. At the same time, Jeff, who isn't necessarily a combat character all the time, has something to do because he's driving this boat, keeping things in, he's providing support to the combat when he has time, but most of the time it's all about keep the boat in the sky, keep everybody bolstered with willpower and all that. And then finally, Goes was at the time really, really fragile. I guess Goes never really grew out of being fragile, but Goes was really fragile. And he couldn't be on the sunboat because he was just going to get killed, and he couldn't do a lot in that combat. He could have done some small buffs for people, but it wouldn't really have been much for him to do.
Also, real quick, the important part of my genius for this combat was Goes couldn't make it there. Like, I could have given him something to do on the bark, but he was saving Sangria's children at the time, and so was stuck on Earth while they were traveling. So I needed something for him to do on Earth because he missed the boat on this whole story I'd already written.
So what he ended up doing was, instead, he ended up mirroring the ancient Egyptian priest practices that were intended to drive Aphep away. So he ended up running through Egypt, desperately trying to perform these priest-scripted ritual and ceremonial actions that would give bonuses to the people on the sunboat and give negatives to Aphep's forces. So he was directly affecting the combat, and he was actually having small combats of his own. Like, sometimes he would run into spawn of Aphep, and they would be, maybe Legend 5, but a big deal for him because he wasn't a physical dude. I'm sorry, I always overestimate them, but so he was running around, and they needed him, Every time he succeeded, it would be a great breath of fresh air for the people on the boat, because they'd be like, oh my gosh, I got some resources back, or I can feel that I have a bonus against fighting this snake now. And then when he would fail, or he didn't get there in time, it would get harder and harder, and, they would be having a much worse time keeping track of it. And so it's exactly what we were talking about, where it's a big, huge scene where not everyone is in the same place, and not everyone is doing the same thing, but they're all combined contributing to this combat, and through their efforts in those different areas, they managed to succeed together, where if they had all been combat monsters, they probably would have just died.
Yeah. Real quick, some stuff she left out, excuse me, was the reason that people needed to defend the boat was because Horus was also gone.
Right.
So 2 demigods were taking his place on the boat.
Yeah, it was set on a bunch of demigods that were like Legend 7.
Well,
it's not
and
going well.
Mahis and
Yes.
all the other people that are normally on the boat. But the other thing was that Jeff just driving the boat was some good rolling and some good stuff, and he enjoyed it. But the other thing was that the more successfully he drove the boat, the more bonuses they got versus resisting Aphep's powers, with the power of his son being augmented, and then also being able to steer just a little away from some of these monsters. There were some combat rolls where I'd be like, okay, well, a giant part of Snake is coming in to kill Sangria. If you can tilt the boat just right, she'll get a DV bonus to this particular attack, and that'll make sure that she gets saved. So he was doing a lot of guardian and saving and stuff while also driving.
So it's a good example because it's most of the things we were talking about in one. It's giving some characters things to do that are specifically catering to their special skills, giving Jeff something to do with sun, giving Ghost things to do with magic. And then it's giving the combat characters their time to shine against really difficult enemies, and they can do that the whole way through. And then it's also providing smaller enemies, like the small snakes that Ghost was fighting, that characters that aren't big combat people can still triumph against.
Yeah, but are still, just that much difficult.
Oh, he almost died at the end.
A couple times,
yeah. A couple times.
I mean, there was a whole bunch of mess. But
I think that's a really
look at me. The big important part is that all of this was really cool and all worked really well, but it all spawned out of a mythological precedent on its own. And so it was important to weave those into the different stuff too.
Right. So and those things are out there all over the place. It didn't take us a lot of time to go through the pyramid text and be like, oh, here's these rituals against Apep. Somebody could be doing these.
Yeah.
So look for, whatever they're doing, look for things that happen around those kinds of things in that culture's myth, and you can usually find something that gives the non-physical people something to do.
Because every pantheon religion has non-physical gods. They totally exist, so there needs to be stuff that they did as well. And so if you look and search for those, you'll find out stuff for your own people to do. There's one other thing we're going to talk about.
We're going to talk about cinematic combat.
Yes. Okay, so the question asker, the ASCII.
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 Asker, you were right.
Asker, I was right.
Yeah.
We're the ASCIIs?
Yes, we are.
Okay. Combats are really long. If I have a 4-hour game session, which I'm sorry, that's rough. A combat could be 2 or 3 of those hours, and then I can't get a lot done because what can I do to speed up combat? Do you find that combat slogs it down? What about cinematic combat? Just say, I do this, and all of this happens. I don't have to roll or anything.
Cinematic combat is generally, I'm going to say the high points of what's happening. I'm going to let the PCs say what they're doing, but we're not going to do a lot of rolling, and we're going to basically just kind of talk out what happens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think, boom. First part, combat can be a drag. I have tips and hints to deal with that. I'll talk about that some at the end. But for the most part, combat can be really rough. I think the more practice you have as an ST speeds it up. The more your players can pay attention and stay in the fucking game speeds it up.
Yeah, the more you have people ready to roll instead of going, what is happening? What do I need to do? Okay, now I'll roll.
Yeah, have their roll ready already before they go, and then they can describe their stunt, and then they can roll.
And again, some of that is more practice as an ST, because the more you run combats, the better you get at keeping them engaged.
And sometimes you gotta kick their ass around. They're on their iPhone, and you gotta be like, guys, I want to get shit done.
There's yelling sometimes.
Yeah, no, you totally just gotta kick their asses a little bit, because they're getting a little lost. You may not be succeeding. You may not have them completely engaged, and you need to just get them engaged. You shouldn't do this, but a version of this could be if you've ever seen people play professional chess with the little time clock.
The ping.
Yeah. I thought about doing this at Ragnarok too. Be okay, well, you get 5 minutes.
Go.
So you have 5 minutes for the next hour. You better fucking use them quickly. Don't do that exactly, but I think if you describe something like that to your players, hopefully they can get in the mindset of that. And that can speed up combat a lot.
So then on to describing combat instead of
right. Cinematic combat. I think it has its place. I think it's really good for the first game of a story. I think it's really good for giant battles where the outcome maybe doesn't matter.
Or where there's so much happening that, rolling would not only bog it down, but the PCs can't pay attention to that much anyway.
Right. So the way it fits great for the first game of a story is just usually the first game of a story you want something that is so far below the PCs, and this may not work at Legend 2 or 3, but so far below the PCs that they get to just tell you what happens. Mm-hmm. So you get to say, the bar was attacked by 3 giants. You don't have to spend legend, you don't have to spend resources. You tell me how it ends. And they can be I do all this crazy shit, and I use all my powers. And be awesome, that happened.
And we actually do that even not at the beginning of the story. Sometimes if, Legend 9 Sangria is going to go run out against 30 Legend 5 giants, we're you know what, just tell us if you're doing anything cool, because they can't possibly beat you, so. Yeah,
so if you want to not spend legend and just punch them all, that's fine.
Yeah, whatever you want to do. Narrate to us what happened. We don't want to bog it down with you making a lot of rolls when we know what the outcome will be.
But if you do want to, bring down lightning bolts, that's also cool. Just let us know and spend some legend and you'll be fine. Yeah. I think both of those work well. What I think doesn't work is anytime the PCs have a very real chance of dying or you want there to be any threat of dying, it can't be cinematic. As soon as it goes to cinematic, the PCs go, well, I'm immune from dying.
Yeah,
I can dick around.
the players know that if you're not making them roll, then you're not going to kill them, because that would be unfair. Unless you're the kind of storyteller that will kill them, and that's unfair. Don't do that.
Yeah, don't do that. That's shitty.
But if they know that if you're not making them roll and you're not making them keep track of their resources and their damage, then they're not going to die. So it doesn't really matter what they do. And while sometimes that can be fine, especially if you're trying to foster that kind of feeling, most of the time it's going to detract from it, because they're going to not make decisions that really matter to them as much. They're going to do kind of random stuff. They're not going to pay as much attention, because it makes the combat not matter. It makes it less immediate, and it makes it less fulfilling for them.
I guess that's what I'm getting at, is that the cinematic makes it not matter. It makes it matter for the arc of the story, but it doesn't matter in that moment to the characters, so you're kind of disengaging the players. It's a little bit like ST masturbation.
Yeah, it's seductive for an ST, because you're getting to tell your story, and you're getting to tell a story that's really cool, and the people at the table may even really enjoy it, but it's not the same thing as them writing the story. It's basically you telling them the story.
Yeah, so instead of collaborative storytelling, it's just the one guy storytelling, and if you're going to do that, you can write your story on your own. You don't need everybody there.
I mean, even if you're letting them tell the story too, even if they're each taking a turn saying, this is what I do and this is what I do, they know that you as the storyteller have predetermined they're going to survive and go on to do something else. So they know that they're not really writing the story. They're just
really
part of your story.
Yeah, they're adding lines to a story you already wrote, which sounds like what STing is, but there's a very real difference.
Yes. So it's in small doses, it's completely fine, especially when it helps speed things up or it prevents things from becoming bogged down and complicated and boring.
Or makes rolls for useless combats.
Exactly.
Where you're fighting, like if Sangria is rolling 100 dice for something that has 7 health levels. Like, it's just unnecessary.
Yes, but you don't want to do it all the time, and you don't want to do it too much, because otherwise you're taking away the ability of the players to really be the moving force in the universe, and you're making them not care as much.
Yep.
It's more like they're coming to your house to watch a movie than that they're coming to your house to tell a story.
Yeah. I think that's everything.
I think that's everything.
Okay. We succeeded at part 2 this time!
So that was our 5th vlog. Thanks everybody for watching,
Okay.
and we'll see you next week.
Wait, really quick, I want to plug. I am working on a Storyteller class. I've kind of outlined all the classes, and I have that kind of working. I don't know if that's something anyone would want to do, but if it is, some of the classes are on things like working players of all different varieties into combats and kind of making dynamic combats like that. We'll practice together and work on them together. And then also, what was the other thing we just talked about?
We talked about tick wheels, cinematic combat.
Nope.
I don't know.
No, me neither. Okay, it's gone. There's something else we talked about today that I had also worked into one of the classes. So when that comes out, which should be soon-ish, if people are interested, I'll talk more about that and work with people on a one-on-one basis about making their combat successful.
Yeah. So, until that time.
Until that time. Bye,
See you guys
everybody.
later. Bye.
Hope you enjoyed the Titans.